I feel that this book has given us the capacity to understand Melania differently than I know I did the first 4 years. But I also think that there are things like this that she was anticipating that will actually not be true. Hello, welcome back to my channel. And if you are new with us, then welcome. I would like to earn your subscription today. We are going through Melania's book, and I believe this is episode 11. Of course, you know because you can see the thumbnail in the description, but I'm in the middle of editing multiple episodes, so I believe this is episode 11. We have gone through Melania's childhood, her modeling career, how she and Donald met, the early stages of their marriage where she was figuring out business and then motherhood. And now she's taken us for a deep dive into the White House. And I have really appreciated this from her. I guess I wasn't expecting it because of how kind of a light touch we got over her childhood and fashion career. But we are getting details, we are getting stories and specific experiences, and I'm really enjoying it. I hope you are too. Today we're going to get into moments of crisis and the pandemic. Before we get into this, I just want to remind you that next week we have our All Kennedy Week. We will have the Chappaquiddick on Wednesdays, but everything else next week will be in honor of the 61st anniversary of the assassination. We will do things that are mostly assassination or JFK related. So I hope you'll enjoy that. It'll be a little kind of breath of fresh air, a different topic than the one that we're in right now. Hopefully we will have finished this book by the time we get there so that on the other side we can do some other fun things together. So pay attention for that, and let's go ahead and get into Melania. It was a Saturday in October, a seemingly normal weekend, when memories of 9/11 came flooding back. During weekends, the White House tends to be quieter compared to weekdays. While the atmosphere may not fully resemble a traditional weekend, our family appreciated the chance to enjoy relative peace. Donald was preparing to go to the West Wing, and I was anticipating the visit of a close friend. At some point, I noticed he hadn't left yet. He was still talking to the generals. He was unusually quiet, and then suddenly told me he was leaving. "I'm going to the Oval Office," he said. I had my own preparations to attend to, so I simply said, "Okay." I was caught off guard when I received a call informing me that the president wanted to see me in the Oval Office. It was clear that something important was happening. When I arrived, Donald wasn't there. Instead, I was directed to join him in the Situation Room, a first and unique experience for me. The topic of conversation was the decision to pursue Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Iraqi militant and so-called caliph of ISIS, to apprehend one of the world's most dangerous terrorists. "Watch this incredible action at work," Donald whispered to me. The screens displayed real-time information of the unfolding situation. Curious about the specifics, I inquired about the number of troops involved, and the details were explained to me. My attention remained fixed on the black and white screens as a helicopter hovered above the ground, soldiers swiftly descending. Among the 8 or 9 individuals present, which included the Vice President, National Security Advisor, generals, and others, the atmosphere was one of anticipation. The mission to eliminate the leader of ISIS was a significant objective, and the successful completion of this operation would be a major accomplishment. This pivotal moment was one that Donald wanted to share with me. I was deeply impressed by the bravery and skill of the special forces during the operation. Witnessing such precision and expertise was truly humbling. I was grateful to have had the opportunity to witness the incredible operation firsthand. Chapter 16, 2020. As Barron approached his 14th birthday, I was amazed. Barron possessed a rare combination of intelligence, charm, and diligence. He had remained resolute in his character and values even through the whirlwind of changes and challenges that accomplished his father's election and presidency. He was navigating the spotlight with confidence and poise, embodying a maturity well beyond his years. With a circle of friends, a thirst for knowledge, and a range of hobbies, Barron continued to astound me with his growth and potential. My heart swelled with pride. On June 18, 2019, we officially launched Donald's reelection campaign in Orlando, Florida. The choice of location was strategic, as Florida had become our permanent home outside of Washington. As I introduced my husband once again for what promised to be another extraordinary run, memories of our first announcement at Trump Tower came flooding back. Our country is now thriving, Donald said. Our economy is the envy of the world, perhaps the greatest economy we've ever had in the history of our country. We accomplished more than any other president has in the first 2.5 years, and under circumstances that no president has had to deal with. That last part was indisputably true. Opposition within the Republican Party, resistance from the Democrats, and relentless criticism from the media, a special counsel investigation, smear campaigns, anonymous sources, fake news, sham investigations, and of course, impeachment. On December 18, 2019, the House of Representatives had finally taken the anticipated step of adopting 2 articles of impeachment against my husband. To be quite honest, I was surprised that it had taken them so long to make their move. While there was absolutely no truth to the allegations, it had become abundantly clear that the Democrats were hell-bent on pursuing impeachment. I am convinced that if he were to be reelected, they would undoubtedly attempt to impeach him once again. Now, this is interesting to read because, at least in the first 2 years, this seems highly unlikely because Trump locked up the red wave. Now, we know that now. She didn't know this when she wrote it, and it wasn't known when she published it. But now that we're a week past the election, we know that there is no longer a Democratic majority in the House. And so he doesn't have to fear this in the same way that he did during his first term. I feel that this book has given us the capacity to understand Melania differently than I know I did the first 4 years. But I also think that there are things like this that she was anticipating that will actually not be true. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Republican Senate, Republican House, and Republican President, if that changes the level of animosity and venom that Trump received the first time around. I know the first time around, too, there were a ton of never-Trumpers, and the Republican Party itself was angry that he had taken the reins. They had wanted Jeb Bush or one of the more traditional candidates, and he has kind of broken down the Republican Party and slowly transformed it. And with Ronna McDaniels resigning in the spring, when he regained the nomination this year, he is reforming the Republican Party into a new, different populist entity than it was when he met it 8 years ago. So it's going to be interesting to observe how these things are different than even what she's expecting during this second term. And then an unforeseen circumstance drastically transformed the global landscape. In December 2019, I first saw news reports from China about a novel coronavirus. There was no talk then of it spreading beyond China, let alone becoming a global pandemic. No one could foresee the future, but the unease in the air was concerning. The first case of COVID-19 in the United States was reported on January 21st, stemming from a traveler from China. Events were unfolding at lightning speed. Donald was on top of it all. He had declared a White House coronavirus task force and declared a public health emergency on January 31st. 3 days later, before there was a single coronavirus death, he announced a ban on travel from China. For foreign nationals, this meant no entry. For Americans, it meant they had to go through a 14-day quarantine to return. In the midst of a highly politicized atmosphere, my husband's actions were unfairly attacked, but history will remember his swift and necessary decisions as crucial in safeguarding the health and safety of our nation. This was really the point in time when I switched to paying careful attention to Donald Trump. And I watched the daily briefings. I felt very clued into what was happening, and he was. trying to communicate clearly and openly with the American people, and he did take this decisive action, which people called racist. It had nothing to do with race, of course. It had to do with the origins of the virus, and he was trying to protect America from what he didn't know. Is it a virus? Is it a bioweapon? Is it some unknown thing that's going to wreak havoc and have a 5% death rate? It was not known, and so this was the right decision. In the meantime, the impeachment proceedings moved forward. Wow. You forget which things were happening concurrently, and that is a lot for anyone to be taking on a pandemic and also being impeached. The articles submitted lacked substance, as no witnesses were called and no documents were subpoenaed. It became clear that the trial was merely a performance and a distraction. The constant impeachment chatter had become background noise, something I had grown accustomed to. It was evident, not just to me and Donald, but to most of America, that the process was not genuine. And I think, if you had read this same sentence in summer of 2024, you might go, oh, come on, that's a very biased perspective. I actually think the 2024 election seems to vindicate exactly what she's saying, that most of America felt that process was not genuine. Most of America doesn't believe that these impeachment articles or that the disqualifications or the lawfare that they've engaged in has political teeth, but also has legal teeth. Most people don't believe it. I think her sentence is true, verifiably by the public speaking out in the popular vote. On February 6th, the day after the impeachment trial ended, I left the East Room press conference and entered the Oval Office, where I took a seat next to my husband at the Resolute desk. I was there for a briefing on COVID and our upcoming India trip, which was now just 2 weeks away. They had developed a relationship with Prime Minister Modi when the Prime Minister of India had come to Houston, and so they had gotten an invitation to come for a state visit to India. For international trips, an advance team travels ahead to prepare everything on the ground. Given the spread of the virus, I needed assurance that it was safe for them to travel. Sitting across from me in the Oval Office were Dr. Anthony Fauci from the NIH, Dr. Robert Redfield from the CDC, and HHS Secretary Alex Azar. How safe is it to travel to India at this time? I asked, looking at Dr. Fauci. How many cases do they have? Not many, he said, only 3. This seemed utterly impossible. I had announced that my advance team would depart for India in a mere 2 days, but the uncertainty surrounding the number and severity of cases gave me pause. The risk was undeniable, and as the weight of responsibility for my team settled heavily on my shoulders, the room fell into stillness. I cast a glance toward my trusted physician standing at the back of the room, silently conveying my decision with a solemn shake of my head. Perhaps we should cancel the trip, I said. Their incredulous gazes made it clear that this was not a welcome suggestion. Dr. Fauci and his team confidently assured us that, given the information available, our trip was indeed safe to undertake. After some deliberation, Donald ultimately decided that we would go. The buzz of the virus was unavoidable, dominating every conversation. We began our trip on February 24th at the Grand Motera Stadium, attended by a staggering 100,000 fervent spectators. Donald declared, "India shall forever hold a cherished place in our hearts," eliciting thunderous applause. We then flew to Agra for a private tour of the majestic Taj Mahal, followed by a sumptuous state banquet in New Delhi. We do get a photo of these travels. Let me see. Here they are. And here is that COVID meeting that she was talking about in the Oval. I had the privilege of visiting the Sarvodaya Vidyalaya Senior Secondary School, where I engaged with students and educators to gain insights into their exclusive happiness classes aimed at alleviating stress. We received a colorful and warm welcome in India, and I was pleased that everything went according to plan. In hindsight, we were fortunate that no one fell ill with COVID-19 during our time abroad. As February drew to a close, it became evident that the virus would pose a more significant threat than initially thought. The uncertainty surrounding the situation was daunting. The world was on the brink of significant change. Little did I anticipate that our journey to India would mark the final international trip of my husband's term. Isn't that interesting? You know, I remember this trip actually, like I said, that was about the time that I really started paying careful attention. And it seemed to me that with the concerns about China and the risk that there was, he knew, of course, that the virus had come from the Wuhan lab, but he wasn't allowed to say it. There was the risk of global war, there was the risk of accusations, there was a lot of international risk associated with identifying the location that COVID-19 came from. And so during this time, I remember him specifically reaching out to India, which, if you don't know, India and China are the two most populated nations on earth. And him talking about the importance of having a close alliance with India in light of global events. And of course, he didn't come right out and say it, but the idea was, in case anything goes awry with China, in case trade deals are ceased, there would be another vast economy on which America could rely and interrely and interdepend to address economic issues, to address issues in that sphere of global politics. So it was interesting to me and timely that despite the risks of COVID, that Trump went and cultivated that kinship and connection with India almost as a stopgap measure if and when something happened with the relationship with China. That was all very tenuous at the time, and I thought this was very smart of him to do. It was just a timely moment for foreign relations. There were conflicting opinions among experts, so I took it upon myself to implement changes within the residence and the office of the First Lady. I directed staff to work remotely when possible, to maintain safe distances in the office, and to wear face masks in adherence with the latest guidelines. I made the difficult decision to suspend public tours of the White House. I directed most of the resident staff to remain at home. Donald, Barron, and I would manage with a reduced team. The East Wing was also closed, with all staff working remotely. I think it's interesting to read about her precautions, and of course she had a much larger quantity of people that she was having to make decisions for. Those who were staffers in the White House, those who were resident staff, cooking staff, cleaning. I don't know about security measures. She doesn't go into that, but just thinking through the quantity of humans that you're responsible for. And actually, I can kind of relate. I remember going to Costco during these very weeks of February and March when things started getting really tenuous. And I don't know if you remember, but they put restrictions on how many things you could buy and that kind of thing. Except most families have four bottoms that they are buying toilet paper for, 4 bodies that they are buying milk jugs for, and at the time we still had 11 people at home. And so I definitely had that weighing on me. Every time I went to Costco, I knew people thought that I was one of the hoarders who was just buying way too many gallons of milk, way too many packs of toilet paper. And I felt bad, but just like smaller families wanted to buy 1 extra of toilet paper, well, we needed the big Costco ones on a normal basis, but then 1 extra looked like me being a real hoarder. So anyway, I kind of get the perspective of when you're in a crisis situation and you are responsible for more people than just yourself, significantly more, it changes the way you assess risk, and it definitely brings about a sense of stewardship and responsibility that's different. And I see that in her, where she is trying not just to think about she and Donald and Barron. In fact, their trip to India, to me, seems like she was willing to be personally risky, but yet these decisions seem like she is making difficult choices on behalf of others to safeguard their health and their well-being, taking that risk factor into account and not wanting to be responsible for the harm of another human. Donald was uniting individuals from various sectors, effectively mobilizing efforts to address the growing demands for ventilators, tests, and personnel. On March 19th, I released the first in a series of public service announcements on my official Twitter account. While changes need to be made now, I said, this is not how we will live forever. I wanted to reassure the public. I coordinated phone calls with my counterparts in countries such as France, Japan, Canada, Germany, and Italy to exchange insights and offer mutual support. I organized boxes of Be Best supplies and food from the White House garden for hospitals, foster care homes, and shelters. We delivered lunches to local fire stations for firefighters and first responders, as well as to a home for single mothers. So that's really kind that she was able to, in these moments, just like we all were, looking for ways to connect when things were shut down. But she was finding ways to serve their local community there in DC, and that's really special. In a public service announcement released on April 9th, I recommended wearing a mask when meeting with other people to help prevent the spread of respiratory droplets. I expressed deep gratitude to the true heroes of our time, nurses, doctors, and teachers. It was during these challenging times that we saw the remarkable spirit of unity and compassion that defines us as a nation. As the global pandemic spread, the United States also faced a crucial election year. On May 26th, a pivotal incident unfolded as a 9-minute video circulated on social media, a cell phone recording showing the killing of a Black Minneapolis resident by a white police officer. Within a mere 2 days, the video had gone viral, serving as the spark that ignited a national conversation on police brutality and racial injustice. The firing of all 4 officers involved in his arrest did not quell the public outcry for justice. Protests demanding accountability and systemic reforms to address police brutality intensified. However, this tragic incident did not warrant dismantling the entire system. I've long championed the right to peaceful protest as a cornerstone of American democracy, but the widespread violence and destruction that we witnessed were troubling. They were. Communities, small businesses, local residents should not be in danger of destruction, devastation, complete danger, and violence at the hands of people who are angry, rightly angry at a wrong situation. The means that we have of protest and then lodging our protests through community service and voting are the means of change. And simply destroying people's businesses and livelihoods is not the way. It's not ever the way. She's right. The violent demonstrations in cities across the country, driven by the inflammatory rhetoric of Black Lives Matter leaders, caused widespread destruction and harm to businesses and communities. I couldn't help but wonder what can be gained from such destructive behavior, as it only leads to more suffering and devastation. Absolutely. Then you're taking someone who, their whole lives they've worked toward this thing. One of my sons works for a local small business owner, and it's been her dream to open this shop. And she brings her skills and best ingredients and amazing ideas and what little resources she has. And she's slowly building a business that has an amazing reputation, wonderful flavors that they offer to the public of sweet treats and amazing things that she concocts. But it takes her dedication. She's the one getting up at 3, 4 a.m. or staying up until 1 a.m. when there's a huge order that's due. And her employees go home, but she's still the one there doing that. So I just have such a heart for small business owners, and this sort of retribution that the community pays for is just devastating. It's wrong, and it's not at all the heart of the American right to protest. The American right to protest is the right to peacefully have your voice be heard, to print whatever you like, to believe whatever you like, to say with full voice and whatever amplification you can provide or can earn, to say the things you believe and to not have those things censored. That's the American right. But the right is not to then take your inward emotions and volcano those out onto your community with whatever ramifications come. That is not the right to protest. That's just tantrums. That's just out of control emotions, and it leads to nothing. What she says is right. There's nothing that can be gained from that destructive behavior. On Friday morning, I issued a statement. Our country allows for peaceful protest, but there is no reason for violence. I'm afraid my words fell on deaf ears. On the afternoon of May 29th, I was in the residence. When I walked over to the north side, where the dining room and Barron's room were located, I could clearly see and hear the protesters gathering outside. Suddenly, the situation outside the White House took a concerning turn as protesters became more assertive and attempted to breach the gates on the east and west sides of the building. Their demands to see the president, who was in the Oval Office on the ground floor, indicated a desire to disrupt and sow chaos rather than peacefully exercise their First Amendment rights. This level of aggression and insistence on accessing the president's office was highly unusual and alarming. While I wasn't worried for my safety or that of my family, knowing that the Secret Service and law enforcement were vigilant and capable, I couldn't completely dismiss the unpredictability of the situation. I spent part of that afternoon with Barron and my parents as the intensity mounted, but there was little I could do. That would be a stressful position to be in. Returning to my office, I resumed work, only to be interrupted by a loud knock on my door. The thick White House doors muffled little, and the assertive tone of the Secret Service agent's voice left no doubt about the urgency. Ma'am, we need to leave the residence. We need to go to the bunker. The president is already on his way there. Really? I was genuinely taken aback. I simply couldn't fathom the possibility of anyone breaching the building, let alone reaching the residence on the second floor. I asked again, do we need to go? Yes, ma'am, he replied with no hesitation. Annoyed, I gathered my jacket along with both my personal and White House phones, slipped on my shoes, and headed to get Barron and my parents, only to find them already waiting for me at the elevator. We've talked about this before, but since she's mentioned it twice in this, I don't know if they lived there during this time or if they just lived nearby, but her father and mother provided wonderful real-time support to them with Barron so that they could do things like the India trip or go to different functions and requirements of them. But Barron could have a consistent, even just pick up from school and those kinds of things. I'm sure some of those things were handled by security, but the person who was there with him personally was either his father and mother and or his grandfather and grandmother, which is just a really special thing that they were able to provide for Barron during those years. Back to the waiting elevator. While I understood the precaution for the president's safety, the Secret Service had made its decision, and it was pointless to contest it. Once before, when aircraft flew over the White House, the Secret Service had put us on standby, although no further action was required. I had never anticipated needing to use the bunker to seek refuge from a crowd of aggrieved protesters. Donald was already in the bunker when we arrived, and he could sense my frustration. He remained composed. Outside, the situation appeared to worsen. Rioters hurled bottles and bricks, injuring agents. People were being arrested. We were required to wait for clearance from the Secret Service. I had brought my phones in the hopes of accomplishing some work, but I found to my disappointment that they did not function so deep underground. So we patiently waited. And I just wrote down, I'm really surprised there's not provision for this. I'm surprised that there's not leave your phones, they won't work there, or a provision of here's an online desk, that you can access to keep in touch with your East Wing employees or whatever. It just struck me as surprising that there's not provision for the First Lady to continue her work if need be. especially for a protective measure. I could see if there's a nuclear bomb going off, then there's no need for that. But if it's just a protective measure, it's surprising to me. What about you? After approximately 2 hours, Secret Service and law enforcement had brought the situation under control enough for us to be escorted back upstairs. Once back in the residence, I realized that I still had no phone signal, and neither did anyone in the family. When I asked, the Secret Service informed me that all phones become permanently inoperative once inside the bunker as part of a security protocol. Isn't that interesting? I'm sure there's layers of reasons for that, but that is big time, right? That your phone would just be wiped and useless. This was our 4th year in the White House, and my desire to see the country heal had never been stronger. I craved a harmonious existence where peace, prosperity, and shared triumphs were the norm, where people collaborated toward common aspirations, enhanced education, heightened safety for our children, and improved lives for all Americans. Seeing Black Lives Matter painted in monumental letters on 16th Street Northwest in D.C. and 5th Avenue in front of Trump Tower in New York made me ponder the ultimate impact of slogans, protests, and historical monuments in shaping our society. While racial unrest may prompt the removal of certain statues, it is imperative that we do not simply erase the less favorable aspects of our past. Rather, we must use these moments as opportunities for education and growth, ensuring that future generations understand the complexities of history and work toward a more inclusive and just society. Simply erasing the disagreeable parts of the past cannot be the answer. We must instead learn from our history. The United States, a true melting pot of races, religions, and ethnicities, inevitably harbors potential for conflict among those diverse groups if we don't learn to respect and accept people for who they are as individuals beyond their group identities. Peaceful disagreement should be our shared goal. Yet the focus on grouping people often leads to stereotypes and labels, which fosters intolerance. And I just have a hearty amen for that. She finishes out this section by saying, our differences create a more fascinating, creative, and innovative world. Yes, I think that one of the things that America, interestingly, has not come to grips with is the way that diversity of cultures is a reality. I think we take this idea of a melting pot and historically thought we're all going to melt into the same thing. And if you think about, though, the variety of different cultures that come into America, we actually have strengths in each that are brought. And by trying to minimize differences or alternatively focus solely on group identity, I think we're missing the ways that if we all bring our strengths and we all bring goodwill toward one another, but we're all committed to the same principles by which we will live, we actually can have a really strong nation. But when we are focused on nitpicking one another and or tearing down other people because of their group identity, that is a danger zone. That is where, like what she's talking about, these disruptive, destructive, unhealthy, and unhelpful, ultimately unfruitful protests lead us toward a place that is not for the good. And so this is something that America still has to work through. I think we're still in process with this. And I'm glad that from her perspective, seeing what she's seen as an immigrant, as a foreign European resident, as someone who has traveled and seen now as First Lady broad swaths of the world, that she's bringing her insights is actually, I think, really helpful. I really enjoy hearing that from her. What do you think? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you're not subscribed, but you've made it this far, please subscribe and join the journey with us. I believe we have one more episode, possibly two, but I think I can wrap it up in one. So I think we'll have one more episode of Melania, and then we'll get into our JFK week. And you guys have a great day, and we will see you soon. Bye.